Welcome, everybody. So this is our Inspire Inclusion International Women's Day focused panel discussion. We have got 6 leaders from the construction industry who will be answering numerous questions, as well as any questions that you put through on the chat. We have Angela Rushforth, Helen Isherwood, Sam Grierson, Martin Mongan, Chris Murray, and Leighton Davis. I'm going to let you lot introduce yourselves and say why you wanted to be part of the panel, as you'll do a far better job. So I'll sort of point out in what order to go, because it's probably easiest. Angela, would you like to go first?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Angela Rushforth, and I'm MD of Toolstation, which is part of Travis Perkins Group. Part of the panel, I'm the initial sort of founder of CIC and chair of CIC. And the reason I suppose it was founded was whenever we went out to people to talk about diversity within the industry, it was always seen as it's an industry thing, it's just an industry problem. So we determined that actually we needed to change the industry. So that's why I'm here.
Fabulous, thank you. Helen, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm Helen, Managing Director of AD, which is part of the wider Genewitz Group. And my interest is obviously, I have lots of colleagues who are female, and helping them to develop their own careers is a really great thing to do. Also, I'm very keen that we start to move the agenda on and not just talk about women, but just talk about that wider diversity of other people from different minorities.
Great stuff. Thank you, Helen. Sam?
Hello, Sam Grierson. I'm Customer Proposition Director for Wolseley Group. I'm also their Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Chair. And I really wanted to get involved when I heard what Angela was doing and what she was forming, because I think we can make change within our own companies, like at Wolseley, but we're so much more powerful when we reach out and work together, sort of put competition aside.
Great stuff. Thank you. Martin? Oh, you're on mute, Martin.
So determined I wasn't going to be the first person to do that. Martin Mongan, CEO at Bristan Group. Yeah, reason for being involved is really well, I think everyone's touched on it. I think everybody needs to feel the need to really drive change in this industry, and if I can help do that and help bring Bristan on that journey, then I'm delighted to be part of it.
Fabulous, thank you. Chris?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Chris Murray. I am newly started in Ibstock, new in the construction industry, managing director for the clay and concrete businesses there. And I wanted to get involved because in my previous company, I was heavily involved from a leadership position in trying to drive our I&D agenda, and wanted to do the same within Ibstock and the wider construction industry.
Fabulous, thank you. And then last but not least, Leighton.
Thank you. Yeah, Leighton Davis. I'm the sales director for SIG. Very similar to everyone else, really. I'm a great believer in equality for all. I'm a member of our own DEI forum, and saw this as a natural extension of that, and hopefully try to be part of the solution.
Fabulous. So as you'll be able to tell, and we've got 6 fantastic panelists, not just from a sort of a leadership influence perspective, but also experience and desire. The intention is good with everybody here, which is fantastic. So we're going to, hopefully with the questions that we've got, we'll start to think about change, what we can do, what we should be doing, and yeah, just pick people's brains, which is amazing. So first things first, we're going to jump straight into the questions that we've got. So Sam, are you able to let us know what you think belonging means within the construction industry, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's several levels to that. And if we're going to think about ourselves in terms of female, male, obviously non-binary as well on the gender spectrum, but if we are going to do that, we need to challenge the stereotypes of what masculinity is and what femininity is and what does that mean? And do we have those ideas about that job's a male job, that job's a female job? And I think that's all got to go away if we're going to do that and sort of start that conversation. I think also we need to embed the voice of women at every level within the construction industry, and that's right through to the exec and the group level boards, right across the organisation. I think until women are represented at every single level and they're sitting around the table, then again that sense of belonging and kind of being able to look around you and see that role modeling, it's not going to happen. And, you know, speaking about that table and having a voice around the table, but I think the way that we chair meetings and we manage meetings, quite often it's often the leader who does often happen to be male that sets the agenda. They speak first at meetings, and that can dominate meetings. But if we looked at innovative ways to run meetings and allowed everybody around the table to have a voice, and that looks, you know, that looks different for different people, but let everybody contribute and let everyone have a voice. And finally, I think a sense of belonging is getting other women and challenging ourselves to look at their own limitations. Am I limiting myself as a woman? Am I listening to my colleagues limit themselves with sort of statements they might make about themselves, and actually freeing ourselves from those limitations and kind of like embracing an environment where we could belong?
Fabulous, thank you. And based on what Sam just said, does anyone else on the panel want to add anything? I know there were some good nods going along there. Does anyone want to add anything, or are we happy that Sam sort of covered that off? All right, fabulous. Okay. We talk about, you know, the reason, the importance and why we need to create an inclusive construction industry, so that we've sort of got the moral rationale of the business case, and we've got the heart side of things. It's the right thing to do. You know, we've got the statistics and the sort of metrics is why we should it. But Angela, why is it important focusing on that sort of the you know, because it's the right thing to do side of things? Why is it important that we create an inclusive construction industry?
Well, it does come back to it is the right thing to do. And I think it's when you look at an industry that has such a low penetration in you know, in females and in terms of diversity across the board, you know that we're missing out on so much absolute talent and caliber. And as Sam mentioned, there's great jobs and roles to be had right the way across the construction industry, that we're missing the opportunity to have diversity within that across the board. I think also there's a whole piece around diversity of thought. It's around how do you have different views around a table. You know, we'll come to, you know, what does a business case look like in a moment, but you know, part of that business case is the fact that you just create better solutions when you have diversity of thought around the table. And how do we do that more often? And I think, you know, as I say, when we look at, you know, less than 20% of our population are diverse across the construction industry, that just can't be right. When you look out at, we don't represent the actual communities that we serve. If you look out into the communities that we serve as a construction industry, we're in no way representative of that. And as I say, just missing out on a huge amount of talent because of it.
Fabulous, thank you. And then Leighton, just to expand on a couple of points Angela said, what, you know, in your perspective, from a business case side of things, why is it important that we create a more inclusive sense of belonging for women in the industry?
Well, almost exactly as you said. I mean, unfortunately, I think we'll all work with people who probably feel that somehow equality is a tick box exercise, or may even feel that equality for all somehow means inequality for them. I've never really understood, but I think it's worth understanding the commercial benefit of a diverse workplace, and all research shows, and exactly some of the things that Angela's touched upon already in terms of the talent pool. But you know, the most diverse companies are some of the most profitable. Those in the top percentage of gender diversity on their executive teams, you know, are 21% more likely to experience above average profitability, and the opposite is true. Those on the lower percentage of gender diversity are 29% less profitable. And there's numerous stats, you know, to back that up and provide that. And exactly as Angela said, if you don't actively work towards a more diverse workplace, you're likely missing out on a lot of talent. And obviously, it encourages an environment that people will want to work at. You know, and there is an age gap on that as well. You know, there was a recent research by PricewaterhouseCoopers. Female millennials look for employees with a strong record on diversity, with 85% saying that it's important to them. So whatever research you look at, it will tell you that there are huge commercial benefits to having a more diverse workplace, diversity of thought. You know, the list is really endless.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think, you know, just to elaborate on that, we're in a place where we know, you know, the construction industry, we have an aging workforce, we have, you know, a real big skills gap. So we can't keep fishing from the same pond, I guess. You know, to use that analogy, we need to think differently about talent and view talent differently. And, you know, what is, you know, are we best placed getting someone who's really experienced, and what does that experience mean? What does qualified mean? Who is the best? We will always recruit the best person.
I think
However,
also, sorry, I was going to say also, I think that all of us work for companies where we, you know, we're part of a community, we're part of a society, regardless of how big we are. And I think it's important that the people we employ are representative of that society that we're part of.
absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, yeah, brilliant point. Actually, Leighton, I've never really thought about that, but actually, the building infrastructure, you know, is for everyone, is for the entire population. So absolutely right. Yeah, fantastic. I've just seen a couple of questions pop through the chat. What we will do is we'll come back to those at the end. So we're just going to carry on the discussion to make good use of our panel's time more than anything. Helen, in terms of, you know, women supporting women, it's International Women's Day, we'll always say, you know, we've got the sisterhood, we've got this, but actually in reality, that isn't always the case. So in your opinion, in your experience as well, potentially, how can women be better allies to other women and minority groups?
I think it's a good question. I think this is partly around being kind to each other. Sometimes in an odd way, you can see competitiveness between minority groups or between women, because I think the way they've come through, and so making sure that we don't get into that situation. All of the good things around, if opportunities come up, make sure that we do everything we can to recommend colleagues to be part of that are from those minority groups. Make sure that those people have a voice or an opportunity to participate in things. Thinking about how we coach and share our experiences, or have a support network for minority groups within the business to make sure that they feel that there's a safe space for them to raise any issues they've had or to get opinions. So I think it's about collaborating and communicating.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Some brilliant ideas as well, and tactics to start bridging that gap so that we can be, you know, allies to everyone. So yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Andrew and Sam, from your perspective, anything to add from that sort of female side of things?
I think also what's challenging is when you're in an environment where you actually see a situation that's uncomfortable for another woman, how do you reach out, support that woman without making them feel like you're, you know, running to their defense, which might put them also in an uncomfortable situation. Let me bring this to life with an example. It happened to me several months ago. I was in a construction related meeting and it was all men around the table and myself, and we were chatting and they said, I'll come up with her name, Kate. Kate's going to be joining us. She's a fantastic engineer. She's working on this new part of the project. And then as Kate walked in, the person said, Kate, would you mind taking the notes during this meeting? And I, you know, it's how can you support and challenge gender biases and stereotypes around roles that the people play in meetings? How do we do that for each other in a curious way, not a combative kind of, you know, going head on at something? So it's kind of a challenge out to all of us to say, how do we do that with curiosity?
Yeah,
I think.
Go on, Angela.
I was going to say, I think some of it is building individuals' confidence up as well, because I think there's a number of times that they will have lost confidence being in those situations and not being able to get their voice heard. And therefore, how do we build women's confidence up so that they do feel heard? And it's, I mean, that's the important thing, that they feel heard. I sort of reflect back on, I suppose, my early career, and I remember feeling that I had to be a bit more like a man, rather to be able to succeed and join in with the jokes, etc. Feeling really, really uncomfortable doing it, and therefore, you know, how do we make sure that people feel that they can be themselves and be confident to be themselves? And you know, I think that there's many ways that we can help and support to do that through mentoring, etc., which I think is really important. You know, being able to share some life experiences with others so that they do feel that confidence and don't have to necessarily do the same things that we had to do.
And I think what was interesting, both Helen and Sam, when you were talking about, you know, essentially having to be more male, or character, from a characteristics perspective. Earlier on in your career, there were big nods as well. So unfortunately, that's a shared experience, which absolutely, in order to change and create that sense of belonging, people have to feel they can be comfortable with themselves, which is the complete antipathy of what you've experienced, the three of you have experienced. Martin, we've spoken about women and how we can, be allies, and what we need to do and what we need to consider about being allies to each other. But in terms of men, how can we, or why is it important for more men to be engaged in inclusivity, inclusion, etc.?
Well, I think the sort of harsh reality is, particularly in this industry, is that most of the positions of power are held by men, and therefore, if they're not leading the debate and and being involved in the debate, then things aren't going to change the way that all of us sitting on this call today would expect them to change. So, but I think talking and being part of the debate is only a part of it. We have to be seen to live and breathe this, and one of the things that I'm extremely proud of from a Bristan point of view is, in the 3 years I've been there, we've gone from a very leadership team of 8 middle-aged white men to a team of 4 men and 4 women on that team, and I think we are a much better business to work for because of that. We have a different view of what our industry and our business needs to look like, and I think we're a much more compassionate, we're a much more empathetic business, having that level of diversity across the leadership team. So I think it's vitally important that we do this, and I think it's how we take this from an audience of 10 people to a much wider audience to be able to get this message across. And if I can help in that, and the other gentlemen on the call can help in that, because of the positions we hold, then it's our duty to do that.
Thank you. And just to draw on that point about Bristan, and you sort of going to 50-50 from a leadership team perspective, assuming that was a conscious effort, unfortunately that doesn't happen by luck. How did you, I guess, what did you have to do internally, whether there be conversations or a cultural shift, or how did you manage that? Because that is a huge shift in a 3-year period.
Yeah, I mean the first part of it is obviously getting rid of the people that have been in their jobs for a long time, that feel like that they should be there for life. So yeah, there was some tough conversations, and then it was about bringing in people that I knew could really drive change within the business, and it happened to be that they predominantly were female people I'd worked with in the past that I knew could really drive our business forward. So yeah, it was conscious, it was very conscious, but I suppose the only way it will look like it's been a success is if in 2 years' time we're having these conversations, and it's one of my female colleagues who's sat here as the CEO of Bristan rather than myself. So.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
My other point is so it's interesting because we've done the same. We've gone from being an all-male exec to now being 4 men and 3 women. It's an odd number, so somewhere else. Yeah. But it's interesting because I've seen this, and actually when I reached out and asked for some comment from some of my colleagues about their experiences around gender bias, one of them also brought the same thing up, that she has had the same feedback about, are you bringing others into your team, into your management teams that are female, because you're trying to make a point about having more females in that environment, which is ironic because you wouldn't do that if it was a man recruiting other men. But it's a fair point, and my response and her response are very aligned in terms of, actually, no, it's not about that. It's about bringing the best person, the best talent in for that particular role at that particular time. And whether, whatever their background is, that's the person that should get the role. And so I think we have to be very careful as we do this, that we make sure that the message is appropriate as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And communication is key when it comes to all of this, particularly with, change. I mean, all of you will have dealt with change management for various different situations, various different roles. And a key component of that is communicating it correctly so that people understand what's happening and why. So yeah, I couldn't agree more, Helen. Everything falls down. If you were to Google why doesn't diversity and inclusion work, it's not from a statistical or a research paper perspective. It's because it's not been communicated properly, and that's we don't win the heads and the hearts. Fabulous, thank you. Chris, coming to you for your first question now, if that's all right. We've spoken about why it's important. So Martin spoke about why it's important for more men to be engaged, but how can we do that? How can we get more men, involved as stakeholders, as interested parties, as engaged parties, as key drivers of change?
Yeah, going back to one of the original questions at the beginning, in and around why is it important we have an industry where women be successful and belong. We talked about how it's the right thing to do, but I think it's essential for the industry, actually. And the fact that it's essential for the industry, I mean, I was really interested in the points on talent and talent development, the talent pool, all that side of things. And I think a lot of men, if we just talk about it in terms of D&I, it just becomes another thing to do. We have to talk about it in terms of all the other parts that we've discussed in this call: talent and skill pool, economic growth, social responsibility, and even personal growth and satisfaction for those men as individuals. There's a lot of men there that would like nothing more than to support the advancement of women and other minority groups in the construction industry. So we've got a lot. We've got a lot to offer. Martin's point there earlier about the 80% of men in the senior level positions and things gives us an element of power, but it also gives us a privilege as well. And it's essential that we use it. Got to use that power and privilege in the right way to try and drive all those different elements. But I think there's an element of fear within some men in this new debate that's going on, and we've just got to break that down and give men confidence to be able to lead and use that power and privilege for the right things, and not only just for a topic of D&I, but all those other aspects that it's important to bring. Like I said, talent, economic growth, social responsibility, personal growth. There's lots and lots of reasons why men can make a significant difference, and essential that they are involved.
Fab, thank you. I know of a couple of organisations who have put diversity, inclusion and belonging within health and safety, and obviously we all know that when we go to probably 95% of the meetings we go to, health and safety is second on the agenda behind the agenda itself almost, and it's trying to push it up. So absolutely, it doesn't just sit as a quote unquote HR initiative. Actually this is this is about the health and well-being of all of our employees, whatever background, whatever ethnicity, sexuality, etc. So yeah, to try and push that to free from the shackles of it being an initiative, it just being what we do. Definitely.
I think looking at it like health and safety is a really important point, because as an industry, we changed dramatically over the last 10 years on health and safety. So if we viewed it in the same way, how could we put it at the top of the agenda, as you say, but what did we do that led us to getting health and safety at the top of the agenda? And how do we do something similar? Because actually we did that in quite a short space of time as an industry. And, if we wait for it to happen by osmosis, we'll be waiting for a very long time. Therefore, how do we almost view that as it's a great example of how we can change the industry, I think, health and safety. But how do we view this through the same lens?
I think, just to go off topic, well, not off topic, on topic, but just to throw my 2 pennies worth in that, there's some fantastic work being done in construction, and rightly so, on men's mental health. We know all the horrendous statistics. What we haven't managed to sort of communicate out far enough and wide enough is the connection between men's mental health and that sense of belonging, that toxic masculinity, that, all of that is absolutely a factor in not all, but many people's sort of, health, mental health and state of mental health. So it's trying to sort of almost weave all of the things together to demonstrate that this belonging is so core and key to everybody and everything. But yeah, it's yeah.
Just picking up on.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, thank you. Just picking up on Angela's point, I think in terms of health and safety, I think what we did to drive that agenda was create consequences, and I think that changed a behaviour because all of a sudden it was higher up the agenda. Now, I don't know how that necessarily would compare, but I'm reminded of something bear with me. I promise this relates to what we're talking about. But in American football, they had a problem which still exists in the Premier League, where black players were not given the opportunity to be managers. So they introduced something called the Rooney Rule, where a black player had to be given an opportunity, just an opportunity, to be interviewed to be a manager. And the pushback was, or what you're saying is, a less experienced black person will get the job over an experienced white person. But clearly that wasn't what was being achieved. What was being achieved was you were creating equal opportunities and accepting that left to their own devices, those opportunities did not exist. You had to force that onto the agenda. And I think that is similar to what we're talking about now. I think there has to be an acceptance of where we are now, so that we are forcing something further up the agenda and forcing something of more significance and importance.
Yeah, fabulous. Thanks, Martin.
Yes, so, coming back to sort of Angela's point, I think, you know, from a health and safety point of view, there was a very direct link to P&L and to investor relationships, and it's getting this conversation to be on an equal footing with that, and you know, talking about the sort of that Rooney Rule. Obviously, we have an American parent company, and you know, we are very much part of how they measure themselves, and they obviously have very, very different challenges in terms of D&I over in the States. But you know, but we are expected to have diverse slates, certainly for leadership or sort of senior management roles within our business, and that's from an ethnic point of view, but from a gender point of view. So you know, we talked about it, the best candidate should always get there, but how do you know you've got the best candidate if you haven't got a really diverse slate of people to talk to? And I think that's, you know, again, so there is an element of, you know, unless this is put into not quite the legislation that health and safety is, but unless it's at that level on the agenda, then, you know, we you know, it's too easy to look the other way.
It's
Sounds like
just on that health and safety comparison as well. I think you just got to go beyond that as well, because again, health and safety can just be a tagline. The difference that we've made in most manufacturing across the world in health and safety is in and around defining what the specific actions are that will reduce risk and reduce injuries to people. There's interactions with people who are operating machines, doing good incident investigation, etc., etc., etc. So the elements of health and safety have been defined rather than just we do health and safety, and that's my point. It's like ESG, D&I, health and safety. You have to go beyond the tag and get into the detail of what the 4 or 5 or 6 things that we're going to actually do that's going to improve the overall situation.
I mean, ESG should give us the vehicle for this, but you know, the problem is it feels like everybody is so focused on the environmental side of things, and the social side of things in particular is one that doesn't quite get the same focus.
Yeah.
Fab, thank you. Really, really brilliant insight there, everybody. Really appreciate that. Conscious we've got a few questions now coming through the chat, so I'm actually going to jump to them so we make sure we get through those as opposed to running out of time towards the back end. So first question's come in and is, what is the panel's view on why exactly our industry has low diversity? So what is stopping us having a diverse and inclusive industry? Helen?
Well, I guess there's maybe some work to do in terms of PR around the construction industry about making it more interesting or appealing. I noticed that there's a question about making it more attractive, and I guess certainly there is the point that if you are female or not particularly into engineering, that construction might not be something that you at first sight would think of as being interesting or appealing. And what's really interesting is a lot of, and we've really seen this across Genuit, is across all the businesses. Actually, yes, it's all construction related, but the common theme is the work that's going on around sustainability. So if we can do more work around educating people that there's a huge sustainability contribution that can be made through construction, that might be one example of how you can make it look more interesting to people who otherwise might have just thought it's going to be a load of builders and why do I want to be part of that? So I think there's some education, some PR. One very practical thing that we've done is to, around this question of recruitment particularly, is re-looking at the way we present the business when we put our adverts together for jobs. So they would have always been written in a way that probably was going to appeal to a certain group or graduate type of individual. So we reshaped the wording that we use and some of that language, and to try and broaden the individuals that might be willing to apply for the roles in the beginning.
And by doing that, Helen, did the world implode, or was everything fine? And actually, you've got a far greater depth and quality of candidate.
Well, it's tricky because actually AD is based in Gloucestershire, which has a not a very diverse environment for anyone really. So that hasn't made it any easier, but it is something that also has made all of the teams more proactive about thinking about where recruitment, and also looking wider and further afield for recruitment than within our own county.
Fabulous.
To encourage that. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Sorry, I think we've got to be really careful as well about, because I think it's great that we go out and show the industry in a great light. You know, some people have not had great experiences within the industry, and I think there is an element of we've got to look at ourselves as to that. How inclusive do some of those workplaces feel? And I sort of look at, you know, somebody who's looked after a number of organisations with branch networks, and not every branch feels inclusive. You know, a sole female coming to work in a branch where she just feels very much the odd one out. And I think, you know, there's a lot we can do in terms of demonstrating what a great industry it is. But until we really tackle that, how do we make it a really inclusive workplace, especially, I say, all throughout our industry, that people will join us and still have, or could still have, quite a negative experience. And I think, you know, that does perpetuate, and there's a perspective, there's a perception out there that's the case. And I think how do we change that, and how do we also change perception?
I think that's a really good point, Angela, and I think the environment to which we enter is a really important sphere to have a look at, because the signage that we've got around us historically has said things like banksman, you know, two-man lift. There are so many examples historically of signage like that. If you look at any of the health and safety posters around construction, they've all got that male jawline under the, you know, must wear your hard hat. And you don't really need the male jawline under there. It's just wear a hard hat. So there's some subliminal messages that we could all work on. If you look at PPE, and if you, like I say, like banksman or whatever's written on the back, but if you also look at uniforms, are uniforms suitable for all genders? So menopause, as an example, you might actually want something that doesn't heat retain in the same way. I mean, I'm just giving really specific examples, but it's about uniform, it's about signage, it's about our work environment, it's about posters. And I think in order, if we're going to recruit people so that when they turn up that we feel like we belong, it's kind of all that, isn't it? It's sort of really multifaceted approach to our environment.
And a lot of those examples, which no doubt all of us, you know, can add more onto that, they're relatively straightforward and relatively simple. Now, you know, it's not easy to roll out across a branch network, you know, as an example, and you know, and the cost of that does then, you know, build up and up and up. But actually, in reality, they're really simple, quick wins. If we have, you know, if we don't have the budget constraints and we have the sort of the wider desire to do it, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. I know we've started to touch on you know, the attractiveness of the industry, but it's a really brilliant question from Alice, who said, with regards to recruitment, what is the panel's thoughts around how we encourage colleagues in our industry to recruit candidates that sit outside of their comfort zone, e.g. recruiting those who maybe don't look or talk like they do, like the majority of industry does? So actually, this isn't about making our organisation in the industry as attractive. This is educating the gatekeeper, you know, the recruiting manager, to acknowledge that, you know, someone with a different CV, someone with a different experience set, someone with different diversity of thought, how can we get that person to acknowledge, just because this person doesn't tick all of the historic boxes, you know, how can we get them to see newer boxes, I guess, over to you. Happy for anybody to take that one on initially. No doubt you've all got thoughts on it anyway.
We had a
go on, Chris.
discussion. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, carry on, please.
No, we had a discussion about this exact point, and I tried to set up a small research group last week to prepare me for this panel. I invited 4 or 5 people to come, and I ended up with 50 people in a meeting. So if I was under any illusions of the importance of the subject overall, I was woken up by that. But we were discussing in that little workshop, we were discussing about how we get different types of people into the construction industry, and I was interested to hear about how, from my female colleagues, about how women look at job adverts versus men look at job adverts. And this, the specific that the team gave was around this list. When the job entails you having to do this 12 bullet points, and a woman will look at that and think, I can all do 2 of them, so I'll not apply. And this was a sort of general consensus of the females in the group. Whereas a man would look at that and think, oh, I can do 2 of them and I'll blag the other 10, so I'll be fine. And it was just that really was interesting to me, but it's how important it is how we write job adverts to try and get the right people in, and really think through exactly what we're saying when we post those jobs on LinkedIn and all that sort of thing. Probably a little bit more time taken to think what we're trying to achieve with the people we're trying to communicate with, rather than just a bulk standard job advert that we would always put out there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Chris. I think Martin and Leighton were both wanting to speak up. So Martin, I'll come to you first.
Okay. I mean, couple of points. I think from a sales point of view, particularly from a manufacturing sort of calling into, it's amazing to see so many businesses that still, I was at KBB exhibition last year, and obviously social media was full of pictures of all the sales teams, and staggering how many all male, all white sales teams still exist in our industry. And and I look at some of the stuff that some of our female sales girls put on, and they're out for dinner with a branch in particular, and it'll be one female face in amongst a table of 12 people. So there's a long way to go from that side of things. But I think that the actual getting people to believe they can be involved. Our job adverts, until literally a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, had an image at the top of the job advert, and it was a female half naked in a shower. And as with a full HR department of females, that had been the job advert forever. It was almost like that's just an accepted thing. And it took me to point out that maybe we weren't quite actually sending out the right message to female candidates. So there are so many of the little basic things that have just become part of the wallpaper of our industry that absolutely need addressing. And yeah.
Thank you. Leighton?
Yeah, mine was a bit more of a wider point about how the industry is changing. I mean, I touched upon earlier about obviously younger people that we're trying to employ will want different things from a work environment and what they expect to see, and how inclusive that environment needs to be. But also, I mean, I'm speaking from a point of distribution, but I think it's probably relevant to everyone on the call. I think the industry itself, the construction industry, is going to evolve probably beyond certainly what I've seen in the 30 years that I've previously been in it over the next 10 years, driven by Helen's point around sustainability, but the Building Safety Act, CCPI, and actually where we sit in that supply chain and what's required of us as a distributor will change beyond belief. So I think we have to widen the type of person that we're looking to employ anyway for different skill sets. And I hope it won't be, if I'm honest, who's going to bring immediate sales, which will typically be if someone that's been in the industry for quite some time, which will be the same faces and we all fish from the same pool. I think it will be hopefully driven by conversations that we're having today, but also driven by the industry being forced to evolve, I suppose.
I think maybe there's an element of leading by example. So when we're recruiting in our own teams, making sure that we're choosing people that maybe would be a surprise to some of our colleagues of who we would choose, making sure that when our management teams are recruiting, that we encourage them or challenge them to be looking at alternative CVs. We've also been doing some leadership training with our management teams to to remind them of the importance of having diversity in the nature of the thinking and how that can improve creativity. So some of this is about us getting practical, I think, and showing some of this, and then giving examples and being able to illustrate where, you know, that's been a successful outcome for us.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, go on, Angela.
I was just going to say, I think, you know, some of it is we do tend to look at people who've got experience in the industry rather than actually what are the skills that we need and what's the attitude that we need. Now, when you break the skills and the attitude down, that can be found in so many other places than just in the construction industry. And I've got many examples of bringing people in from a different industry, people who've been, you know, worked in Heathrow Airport or you know, it's a, you know, we're providing great customer service with some knowledge, etc. There's a lot of people out there who've got that skills and competence. And actually it's how do we change the perspective of the recruiter that says, I don't need to necessarily know everything about the construction industry or construction products, but most people, even within the industry, don't necessarily know everything. You know, we've got so many thousands of products and different, you know, different sides of the industry that you're not going to know. But actually, if we just actually went on skills and attitude, we would then be looking at a much wider pool of people and bringing more diversity and different ways of thinking, and also learn from those other industries as well. You know, there's a lot of, you know, retailers and people out there who are doing things differently, better than we are. And those individuals can bring those to us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to take Helen's point about leading by example, I think part of that leading by example is monetary, is the short-termism, because you're absolutely right. You know, I think, Martin, you said about generating sales on day one or late, and apologies, you know, if we know that if someone's coming from outside of the industry, they're not going to have that. They're not going to have that contact base yet. So are we giving them, you know, that learning curve? What's that learning curve like? Do they, you know, do they have to hit the ground running, or is there scope? And you listen, let's be honest, it comes down to it all comes down to the finances in the end, in my, you know, cynical view. Ultimately, we are businesses. So what freedom have we given someone? What budgetary freedom have we given to somebody to allow that learning to go at the right pace, so that actually, you know, they will be able to run on that ground. They just can't hit it running, I guess, from my poorly worded, but you see where I was coming from. Another question into the chat box. As a Middle Eastern female in the industry, on a daily basis, I face challenges that are only discussed on diversity inclusion events and calls. I'm successful at my current role, but I often have to sacrifice my well-being, as I would lose half my sales if I reported a customer or colleague. Every time I face an issue solely because of my gender or race. How can employers improve the culture of this industry other than policies and recruitment? So this is obviously, you know, real life example, lived experience of you know, what is happening within the industry. Angela, you've taken yourself off mute. Ready?
Yeah, so I think, you know, this was absolutely one of the reasons for starting CIC, which was how do we work together on this? Because actually when, you know, when I had a number of colleagues together, this was one of their biggest challenges. How do I face off to a customer? How do I face off to a supplier, etc., that is not in my organisation, but is being inappropriate, or and therefore we've got to work as an industry on this and call it out. We've got to be able to, and it comes back to male allies being willing to stand up or stand out and call things out. But it does come back to how do we build an industry where calling it out is accepted, and that we trust the individuals to be able to call it out, and we've got the right. I know Saba says not about policies, but actually policies is a great place to start, because people can actually point to something that there is a policy within their organisation, and it's one of the elements within CIC that people who join CIC are committing to do, is having somewhere that individuals can call out inappropriate behaviour practices, etc., so that we do all feel that we can belong.
And that calling it out or calling people in, depending upon, you know, how we're going to sort of approach the conversation, how can we create, and this is to anybody from a panel perspective, how do we create that psychological safety so that people feel like they can call it out without fear of, you know, losing half our sales, you know, being impacted, etc.?
I think I mentioned earlier in the example I gave, was about trying to challenge with curiosity, because I think tackling something head on is really, really challenging. I think also what's interesting, Angela's point is really kind of the mainstay here, because if a customer, let's say, comes to one of us and is or isn't challenged, then if they go to another supplier and they're not challenged, and another supplier, then it's acceptable. But actually, if we're challenging that customer when they come and shop with us to buy the product, and then they might go to a competitor and they're challenged as well, and if none of us tolerate this behavior or this language or this way of interacting with us that's basically unacceptable, then that customer will, you know, by having that repeated repetition of us all supporting each other and saying, I'm sorry, we don't refer to it like that, this is the language that we use, we're more comfortable if you use this language, and having conversations and using curiosity rather than being head on. But it is one of the toughest things. I actually spoke to Anthea about this, about putting a toolkit together. If we could come up with some sentences, again, I keep saying using curiosity, as in asking questions back and trying to understand where they're coming from. If we could come up with some sentences that we could all like learn, and then when we find ourselves in these situations, we can think, oh, I know how to challenge this in a positive and curious way. But I think reinforced through industry-wide work is really key here.
I think there's a part of this whole piece around we talked about leadership, leading by example, but I like to talk about leadership in action, and it's moving away when issues like this come up, getting to a point where where the leader of the person that's got the problem is able to take that problem and help solve it, as opposed to handing it over to the people or HR or the D&I function to deal with it. We've seen some of that where our person who's leading the D&I group, they get given all the problems like this from employees in the organisation, rather than the leader being able to take that themselves, deal with it and handle it in the appropriate manner. And I think that's where we need to get to. And we're not there yet, but I think there's a piece between people functions and the D&I functions and the leadership functions to be definitely not the leadership function abdicating that responsibility away to someone else. They have to have the comfort and confidence to be able to deal with it themselves. And I think that would bring more issues to the surface as you started to see those issues being resolved. Not easy, but I think we need to start by leadership in action and start to take some accountability on board and take an action.
Fab, thank you, Chris. Okay, back into some other questions now. Well, I'm going to let you think about this one actually, because I'm springing this on you. As individual leaders, what's your top action to either continue with or to start to do, or that's on your agenda to create an inclusive culture, for your, whether it's your micro environment or the wider organization. So what actions have you got, like I say, on your list to do, or certainly the top priority to try and move the dial? And I apologize because I have sprung that on you all. Just imagine it was put in the chat box, and it's one to answer.
Can I go? Yeah.
Yes, please do. I think everybody will be grateful of that.
Okay, I think for me, lots of the work that we've done at Wolseley has been grassroots led, and what I mean by that is we've gone out to people and said, talk to us. What is it you want to change? What is it that's bothering you? What is it that what do you need to make things more inclusive? And for me, it is constantly about empowering people to talk to us, talk to the line manager, and share, because I think people know their own working environment and they know what they need to change, or they hear customers talking. Or so for me, one of the things that I'm constantly saying to people is talk to us. We're now hopefully given the permission to talk about this stuff and making it feel like a comfortable environment where they can raise it, but actually empowering people to speak up and say, actually, this is what we need to work on. So it's kind of activism, if you like, from all of our colleagues to get involved, and that's how we get the engagement.
Fabulous, thank you. Angela?
Yeah, so I think that for me goes hand in hand with another thing that we're trying to do, which is training managers to have good quality conversations. The manager, especially in a multi-site network, is so important, and therefore the quality of that manager and the conversations that they're having on a day-to-day basis is critical. And how do we fit them to have good quality conversations on well-being, DE&I, and you know, it's a great skill to have for everything. You know, it will help land everything within our business if they can have a good quality conversation. The other thing as well, I think, is around just looking at how we recruit new people into the industry. And we're particularly focused on apprenticeships, because what we've seen is when we recruit at apprenticeship level, we get a much more diverse population coming into the organisation, and they're retained better because they're supported through their first year, 2 years with us, and therefore supported in their early stage of career. And you know, so therefore that retention is greater. So, and that's helping us from a diversity perspective as well. So a couple of key things there, I think: fitting managers to have the quality conversation, and looking at how we recruit, particularly at apprenticeship level.
Fabulous, thank you. Leighton, I can see you've taken yourself off mute.
Yeah, mine was touching upon something there that Angela said, and Martin said at the beginning. I'm fortunate to be within SIG, obviously involved in the employment of people. So at a local level, I can ensure that we try to broaden the diversity of the people that they're speaking to and interviewing and giving roles to. And I suppose also ensuring that we're properly onboarding them, you know, and we're rather than just giving someone a 3-month probation and then congratulations, you passed. You know, we're actually onboarding them properly, integrating them into the business across all departments to make them feel invested in and included within the wider organisation for the reasons that Angela said. And again, it comes down to a very common sense commercial benefit is that the more diverse and inclusive an environment, you know, the lower turnover of staff you've got. And there's a huge commercial benefit to obviously trying to keep hold of the people that you're investing in.
Fabulous, thank you. Martin, you happy to go next?
I will be when I'm off mute. So similar sort of themes, really. I suppose the one we're currently working on is really trying to make sure that we're creating that sort of feeling of psychological safety, particularly around our sort of the bigger meetings that we have in the business that are there to sort of make sure that we're challenging and getting diverse views. And so we're doing some sort of anonymous questionnaires after the meetings to see whether people feel comfortable speaking up, having some sort of small group sessions with the people to really understand, whether we are creating that environment to allow people to feel like they have a voice. And I think, the other one, is that employment of people. Our workforce is 53% female, 47% male, and yet our leadership team was 100% male. So how do our female population feel like they're represented within the business? So it's absolutely making sure that we've done it at an executive level. It's now as we get into those middle management roles as well, and making sure that our leadership teams do actually portray the workforce that we have.
Fabulous, thank you. Helen?
Yeah, so much along the lines of what Angela, Sam, Martin, Leighton said, maybe some other things as well, is making sure that we keep it on our agenda for our communication. So making sure that when we have regular training around diversity and inclusion, make sure that in our colleague briefings that we're sharing, making sure through our kind of community comms. So one example, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, is I love the Accenture video, which is on YouTube, which is Inclusion Starts With an I. So just when we come across things like that, making sure we share it with the teams, because there's nothing like that for reminding, you can easily use the words, but actually I think sometimes you need to hear it from the people that are impacted by it. So I mean, one really good example for me is the Sabre one, Sabre Your Contribution Today. That's a real honest position of where we are, which is horrifying that you feel like that. So making sure that we raise those things and make sure people understand that people are impacted.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you, Helen. And then finally, Chris.
Yeah, there's lots of actions and action plans all written down already and being said. I mean, for me personally, what I want to do is continue learning, continue actively using that power and privilege that we have as leaders, that I happen to have because of the position that I sit in, and not just not it just being another discussion. Like I said, leadership and action orientated, and making inclusivity part of business as usual, and not just another set of another acronym that goes on the agenda. That's really what it is for me.
Thank you all, and thank you for your time. I'm just going to quickly share our final slide and hand over to Angela as chair of the CIC for closing remarks, if that's okay with you, Angela.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that last point was particularly pertinent, that this cannot just be another discussion. This is really just the start of us talking about how do we build inclusion within the construction industry. And I think what's really important is that we're starting to come together as an industry, as a wide industry, to talk about what needs to change, but importantly, how quickly things need to change. So this is really the start of, we did joke about it the other day, you know, International Women's Day isn't just one day. This is 365 days in terms of how do we build an inclusive environment. And actually what we're doing from a CIC perspective, you can see on the screen, in terms of actually starting to share information with each other, which is hugely important. And then what we're looking at doing as well is how do we start to build an inclusion toolkit that we can share with all of our members. And then following on from that, we're looking at an event as well that we will be holding as CIC. But as I say, it really is just the start. And I think, you know, those who've benefited and shared in some of the webinars have really found them helpful in terms of either understanding that they're not the only ones that feel like that or are on that journey, etc., but also finding some great snippets of best practice. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining today. And as you can see, we have a whole set of events that are coming up from a CIC perspective. But as I say, it really is only the start, and it is about how we as an industry work together to move forward on this, you know, topic that's so imperative to the future of the industry.
Thank you, and thank you all.